The darkroom is where the photographer has the moment of truth. That's when the eye can first see what the camera caught in the fraction of time the shutter was open. In this programme, we're going to see some pictures taken on and from a train. We filmed a journey round Wales by train, while British Rail still exists, in a trip that took 2 days last summer. Photographer David Hearn joined us to make his own record of a turning point in the history of the railways. But the assignment took an unexpected turn when we ran into freak weather. We were caught in the floods caused by the worst thunderstorm of the century at Llandudno. The next day, we managed to find some trains still running, and we headed south from the flood, hoping to see the rest of Wales. But some of the most magnificent Welsh scenery remained lost in the mist. At the end of the second day, the sky was lifting, but by then it was a bit dark to take pictures. It hadn't been the simplest of jobs for David Hearn. True, he'd taken plenty of shots, but given all the problems, how would they turn out? The safe light is on, and it's time to expose the first print under the enlarger. When you print by hand, there's a chance to control the process to improve the picture. It's a photographer's trick called dodging. The exposed paper goes into a bath of developer that will bring out the first picture. Again, it's a matter of time and judgment to get it right. And the final touch of the finger can help enhance a detail.
This is the first one, which was the guy asleep.
Swansea Station?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite funny because you always see people asleep in stations. But what I quite like about it is that it's very abstract in that it almost looks in the foreground like a train going by.
We're on the train then, aren't we?
Yes, we're on the train, and okay, this is a guy at one of the first stations we saw. It's very difficult to photograph from a train because the sad things about modern trains is that the windows don't come down like they used to when I was young.
Now it's black and white. Why did you want to do them in black and white?
Well, I guess there's all sorts of reasons. I mean, somebody once said that black and white is the colour of photography, which I think is, I mean, I could make a big argument for that. I needed this very fast film. I've shot on 3,200 ASA film. One of the things I did do, because I did do a test beforehand, being a good professional, is I discovered you needed to shoot over 1,000th of a second if you were shooting out through a window to get anything even tolerably sharp. Most of these are actually taken in about a 2,000th of a second. Now, we did get permission to sort of stick heads out of windows, and I shot some of these pictures, which I actually quite like.
These are intriguing, aren't they? Because these are pictures you can only get from a train and have a weird sort of shape to them.
Yes,
the mirror effect.
And the mirror and things. So I mean, one of these I think is, you know, you pick which one we like. It's actually quite a good picture, and I could see myself using it in some other, you know, if I do a book on Wales, I could see this very well being one of the landscape pictures in the book. This has a charm about it. You know.
Well, that's a classic to me, because that says train journeys to me, because it's the one thing you can't do on most forms of transport, is go to sleep.
Yeah. No, I must say, I love trains. I do think that they are, for me, by far the nicest form of transport. And
I rather like the accident there of the Sun headline, one foot in, and there's his foot there.
Yeah.
That's a bit of sort of luck, isn't it, when you get those little things in pictures?
Yes. Well, you also have to see them, because you could crop the picture differently and not have that in. I think this has enormous charm to it. I just think it's a very funny situation, the idea of the railway and people riding their bikes.
That's my favourite so far.
Is it? Yeah.
I know where it is. It's Shotton, high level,
shot an eye level.
And I love the fact that these two guys, there we are, wheeled transport, and we're there to
Yeah.
do trains, but we've got 2 bikes in the picture, which is not what you'd expect.
No, so certainly not what I expected coming along the railway line. Well, I mean, one of the things that surprised me enormously about the whole trip, which I enjoyed, and I thought it was great fun, is that I do have more pictures, many more pictures than I would expect to get in that amount of film. And I've tried to analyse why that is. And in this situation where I, went in like the lamb to the slaughter, thinking I had no possibilities of producing any pictures at all, I produced things that I quite like. And I think it is due to the fact that the concentration had to be so enormous. Because we'd never had time to do anything.
We made you work
I
hard.
know, made me work very hard.
What's the next one?
Yeah. This, I just quite like the...
Oh, that's shocking again.
Yeah, the connection between the, the graffiti, and it almost relates to the 2 girls.
It could be, they could be Claire and
Yeah,
Debbie,
absolutely.
couldn't well, they might well be.
Yeah,
and another Claire and an Andrea. There's a very complex love story going on here.
Yeah, I know, it's lovely.
It was a hot and clammy day, but the trains were running more or less to time as we headed towards Llandudno on the afternoon of the first day. David Hearn was usually clicking away quietly in the background. He had that knack of near invisibility. But at Llandudno, he changed tack and let the crowd play to him.
Once people are aware that I'm there, and it's obvious that I'm not going to be able to stop that, then I quite like to see how I can milk that situation by seeing how much they will perform for the camera. Because people do love to perform for the camera sometimes.
Well, they performed for this one, you see,
yeah.
especially young people. They do come down and wave.
Absolutely. And so you can sometimes push that.
On top of the Great Orme at Llandudno, fate decided to give the town and us a thorough soaking.
I can't believe it. Look at the rain. All day we've been praying for rain to clear the air so we have a view. I'm caught between tramway cars. Look at me, my trousers are soaked. Go on, be gentlemen. Sit in the wet bit, go on. Sacrifice your trousers, I am. You know.
Over the next 2 hours, Llandudno received 5 inches of rain. It was the worst thunderstorm in living memory. Day turned to night. We were among many rail travellers stranded by the floods who had to be bussed out. The railways were underwater. Now David Hearn had subjects for his camera.
Well, I shot a little sequence on these because it was such a nice sort of situation, and I quite like those pictures.
And they had no rain clothes, these, did they? I mean,
absolutely drenched.
Mum and the kids were quite drenched.
And more than drenched. I personally thought that they were right on the edge of real stress.
I mean, do you find that an important picture in a way? The symbolism of the parents, the mother, and the
yes.
children?
I mean, it's certainly a picture that I would put into the Magnum Library as a symbol of mother and children and that sort of thing. And I mean, it's a picture I quite like.
As a photographer, how do you experience that day?
Well, as a photographer, I was frustrated because all the time I felt that there were better things that I could do. As I say, I was frustrated to suddenly arrive to find that the windows of the train didn't open. I was frustrated to find that the light was even worse than I thought it was. All those sort of things. I was frustrated when the flood, etc., came, that I couldn't actually go and take pictures of the flood.
But you've got a picture there that you say you'd like to see in the Magnum Library as a symbol of motherhood.
Absolutely. So I mean, then when I developed the film later, I was actually surprised by the fact that I got stuff out of it which I enjoyed.
That was day 1. In a moment, day 2. But first, a pause at Tintern in the Wye Valley, home of David Hearn, to consider the man behind the camera. David has made Tintern in Gwent his home for the past 20 years, in the county where his family lived for generations. As his father was in the army, he grew up mainly in the garrison towns of England. He too went into the army at the officers' training school at Sandhurst. Instead of concentrating on a soldier's life, he developed a passion for taking pictures. The world he saw through his viewfinder was rather at odds with the image that might be expected by a young officer-to-be, certainly one with a conventional military mind.
Basically, I fell out with the army, and they fell out with me, and we parted company, and I went up to London and sold shirts in Harrods, in fact, to earn enough money to become what I knew I then wanted to be, which was a photographer.
In 1956, with a second-hand camera, David Hearn went to Hungary, where he heard that a revolution had started. He wanted to be a photographer, and here was something to shoot.
I just photographed what I saw, and Life magazine saw me there. They didn't have many photographers in. They had a lot of money at that time. So they sort of said, you know, would you like to work for us? And so, you know, because I'd said I was a freelance or something. And so almost the first thing I was doing was working for Life magazine. They got me out. I discovered much more difficult to get out sometimes than it is to get in. And they published the pictures, and Picture Post published some pictures, and The Observer published some pictures. And so suddenly I had this enormous advantage of starting at the top. And it's much better to start at the top than the bottom. I became much more interested in what somebody once said of me, the tinsel society. I was interested in those minority cult groups that did things that I didn't do. I mean, I wasn't gay, I didn't take drugs, all these strange things that most people did in the 60s, and yet people that did these various things interested me enormously. So I started to photograph those kind of cultural groups. And because nobody else was photographing them at that time, you know, I mean, people don't realize that in the early 60s, I did a story with Nell Dunn called A Bit of Flesh, which was about people that took their clothes off for a living. And I think I'm right in saying there were 2 strip clubs in the whole of London, you know.
What about Wales drew you?
Well, I mean, although I hardly have a Welsh accent at all, my home basically is always Cardiff. I mean, the first school I went to was in Cardiff. My father's Welsh, grandfather's Welsh, great-grandfather's Welsh. But in 1973, I suddenly got tired of doing a certain kind of story, living in London, etc. I decided to come back to Wales, in theory, just for a year. My idea was that I was coming down here to do a book on Wales. Because I got involved in the teaching, I didn't really have quite the freedom of time that I had thought I was going to have to shoot. And so I shot over a much longer period of time. And in fact, I just kept on shooting. And I did the cardinal fault of not finishing.
David Hearn has again turned his mind to finishing his Book of Wales, and the pictures on a train may well be in it. We return to browsing through the prints he'd made, looking at the pictures from the second day of the expedition. And this is Blaenau Festiniog. We got there by taxi. And here's a group of people, because the weather was still awful. They're all posing, being terribly happy. It's important to say that they were happy on holiday despite what?
I mean, people are delightful. Every time I meet anybody that's a tourist from now on, wherever I go in the world, I would say, this is one of the things you should really do. And one of the things I think one should try to do on it is actually go in the first class compartment, because that idea of sitting up front with little swivel chairs and things, I just think is delightful, and having your sort of cup of tea brought to you and everything. And it is a beautiful view. This is one that I you know, it's the kind of luck you hope for. I mean, there is the sign, you know, about us all, I forget what it says now. Be sure your sin will find you out, you know. And then on the actual notice board of the thing is this little black and white thing reading sex.
On the S of Tannery,
On the S, yeah.
Someone has written sex.
Yes.
And then be sure your sin will find you out.
Absolutely.
It's a morality tale as well.
To be honest, I never saw the S on the S.
Well, that's just a fluke.
Yeah, well, it's
A happy fluke.
maybe it's not. Maybe subconsciously I saw it.
This was one place David Hearn had visited before.
This is the view just before you get into Portsmouth.
Oh, yes, it has that sort of wonderful misty feeling.
Yes.
Another wet day. You were so disappointed.
Yes. And that wonderful writer, Jan Morris, talks about it as being one of the great classic views. Now, because I read that she said that, I had actually photographed it before, and this is the picture in summer.
And well, this was in summer, but
but I mean it's and it's almost identical position. It's quite extraordinary how close it is. This, I think, is the real, and I like this as a landscape. I don't, you know, I'm sure everybody else would say it there, but it's very much. It's the mood of the thing, and
I can't see a division between sky and sea. It just blends.
Yeah.
And those sticks take you out.
Yeah. And it's very subtlety of tones and things. And this very pleasant family we came across.
Oh, that's right. They're on their way home from Butlins to Derby, and the kids all had these balloons tied to their suitcases, and here they are having the lunch. What impressed me about the family was that they'd been to Butlins, they were going home, but the holiday was by no means over. They're having a great time on the
No, absolutely. And I once photographed in Butlins, and by gosh, people have a good time there. They really do.
Well, they took the mood home with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this, you know, it's not a great picture, but I do like the idea of grandfather looking after.
It's the two fingers, isn't it? Grandfather, grandson.
It really works.
That's got charm.
Yeah, charm. This is nice. I mean, it's the sort of thing you see on...
That must be Aberystwyth.
Yes.
Oh, it's super, isn't it?
Yeah, it is nice. I like the girl who...
the necking in the background.
Yes, and she's posing and rather elegant. And
she's 14 and sort of tends to be a bit older.
Could be very beautiful. And
the boys are still at the giggly stage.
Yeah, absolutely. They always are, right?
Slightly awkward, aren't they?
Yes.
Can't cope with this.
Yeah, girls are always far more advanced at that age.
Yeah, they just can't cope.
And it's funny because the boys always think they are, and they do all sorts of silly things to try and be more masculine, and they never are. The women are always much more advanced than the blokes. This is coping with the rain.
Those are
man and wife, I presume.
Footbridge steps, Huntleth.
Yeah.
And this is the afternoon of the succeeding day, and it ain't getting any better.
This year, the Railways of Wales will be split between 7 different operators as the network is privatised. From then on, each operator will assess the future market for lines like these.
There's no accountant in the world that could suggest that these railways are profitable, financially profitable, but you only have to go and speak to all the people to discover that from a social point of view they're immensely profitable. And I think it would be a staggering tragedy if they were in any way curtailed. You know, I mean, it would affect an enormous amount of people's lives forever, you know, because I do think it is part of the Welsh heritage, these lovely trains.
In the 1970s, David Hearn turned from taking photographs to teaching other people how to when he joined Newport College of Art.
I talked to professionals about, you know, what they thought were the important things about photography, and we based the course on that kind of professionalism. We called it a documentary photography course, which later internally in the college turned out to be a problem because the word documentary is open to many interpretations, which meant that members of staff that like to talk about things could continually say things like, oh, it's not a documentary photography course, it's actually a photojournalism course, and they were more interested in that kind of argument. But it was a very good title from a student point of view, because what students, who it seems to me are much more intelligent very often than the staff, or much more instinctively intelligent, they understood that what this meant was that we didn't do fashion, we didn't do advertising, we didn't do those kind of things. We did this strange thing of being interested in looking at things and recording what we were looking at.
During the 80s, the course in documentary photography helped to make Newport the centre of one of the most highly regarded schools of picture taking in Europe. The students went out shooting everywhere.
Well, the students took masses of pictures. I mean, that's what they did. They went out and shot pictures, and we had this very good tutorial system, which meant that nobody had a tutorial for longer than a couple of minutes. But you came back and you would show something, and the member of staff would say, well, I think you've got that slightly wrong, and that would almost be the tutorial, and you'd go out again, rather than this strange thing they now do, which is you go out and shoot pictures for about 3 weeks, and having cocked up on the first day, you then have 3 weeks of having messed up, and then you come and have a timetable tutorial with somebody who then looks at the first contact sheet and sees exactly what you've done wrong there and sort of tells you you've done 3 weeks nonsense.
By the 90s, David Hearn decided he'd had enough of teaching and left his job at the college.
I really wanted to go back to shoot pictures. I mean, I'm a photographer, and one day I remember actually looking and working out that I had actually been teaching for longer than I'd been photographing before I started to teach. My plan now is kind of do the second part of a book, which is the new Wales, and then I have in one book the contrast between the Wales of 70s up to the 90s with the new Wales as it emerges now with its sort of high-tech, etc., etc.
And he's still happy to share with others his knowledge about how to get pictures.
The reality is, if you do what you do very well, then even if somebody else tries to do the same thing, they're either, if they're no good, going to do it very quickly and rather badly, or if they're very good and spend as much time, are going to do it in a totally different way to which you do it, in which case the comparison for me is incredibly interesting. So, secrets, I don't have secrets in photography. I'm delighted to tell anybody anything they like to know, you know.
A selection of the photographs taken on the 2-day train journey have been put on show at Newport Museum and Art Gallery, where they can be seen until February the 19th. They'll be on view at a number of galleries in Wales throughout the year. Some of the people who'd helped us make the film turned up to take a look at David's pictures. And so did Mr. Hearn. He wanted to check that the frames were right and that the room was right. Well, he's a perfectionist. They are his pictures, after all. And he was a little surprised at what he'd managed to catch with his camera on the last train round Wales.